So yeah, thanks to my previous speakers for bringing us back on schedule. A lot of the talks earlier today have been from people who are masters of their art. This will not be the case. This is more about what I've learned over the past few years and the challenges I've faced. So yeah, the learnings of my ramp. Be great to get input from others who have recent experience of learning. I think that once you've mastered tools, people often forget how painful it was. And actually remembering that does help new people joining the community. As a result, there's Scott Reifenbach has sort of started to change the development manual, which I felt had lost its way slightly, and it's now going to be more task based. I've been trying to feed into that, and part of this tool will be to see if I can get any input from others to try and make that more useful for new users. And rather than just saying what's wrong, I'm going to try and capture what I think has been improved on since I started working on the project. So here's some areas of things where I experienced some pain. I want to look at proxies, debugging build errors, recipes, packages and recipes. Some people have talked about that already, application development. And then some things that Ken was also talking about, some cool things and also some improvements. So some context, I started working in the Yocto team in Intel 3 and a bit years ago. I was an open source neophyte, didn't know much about Git or Linux. Spent 6 months in extreme pain, mainly because the project I was assigned to was to get OpenJTK running that was not well maintained at the time because I was new. I didn't know what was the maintainer's problem and what was mine. For next year, I was learning, and it took me about 2 years, I felt, before I could confidently give someone else advice without feeling I might be derailing them. Over 3 years later, I still think the stuff to learn. And I should have taken better notes along the way, but this is what I can kind of remember. Proxies, we all hit this as a pain when we start, we conquer it, we move on, we take it for granted. I just went back to look at the wiki page about proxies. It's 135,000 hits. I don't know how that compares to other pages on the wiki, but I thought that seemed quite a lot.
90,000 of those are from Intel employees.
Nice one. So perhaps this is just a corporate issue. So environment variable approach covers most cases, and that's what I did to start with. However, that does fail when non-fetch tasks are reaching out because the proxy variables are not propagated into those tasks. That will usually happen with Node.js. Are there any Node.js guys in here? Not really. I presented on Node.js last year, and there were not many users. Anyway, I'm not going to rat hole about that. But Intel put some work in a couple of years ago to try and improve that. So only the fetch part was going to go out to the network. That does make challenges with Node. It's kind of a package manager within Yocto that's creating packages. And indeed, anything like that, Go is going to have the same issues. I don't know if there are many Go people here, or anything such as Python itself that will want to go out to the network and pull down the packages. You kind of have to break that apart if you're integrating into Yocto. So there's a big problem there, but I'm not going to rat hole on that. But one thing I am interested in, one of the general rules in Yocto is that only the fetch task should reach out to the network. Who takes that seriously here? So yeah, a few people do. So that's kind of good to hear. So when I said I started out working on Java many years ago, I think it's been fixed now, but one of the Java patch tasks went to fetch a patch from the network. And it blew up and I had no idea what I was doing wrong. Anyway, after a while, some guys in the team I was working with at Intel came out from a container-based solution for this. Essentially, it runs Red Sox in a container. and it's been fail-safe for me. Some people object because they're using a Docker container to really subvert network operation on your workstation. And some people don't think that's a good idea. But if you go and look at the proxy page, you'll see a link to how Chameleon Socks works. And just to say, it's been fine for me. So if I ask anybody else, how do you guys do it?
Now, I just want to give one quick caveat. Chameleon Socks, for some reason, if you're doing Java stuff with Maven pings a socket very, very hard for some reason, and I don't know exactly what it's doing. I've never had time to actually debug it, but Chameleon Socks, the first Maven fetch will work, the second one will be slower. By the time you get to the 5th or 10th, it'll be so slow that you won't download anything anymore. It'll actually time out, and I just don't know why. But because of that, I'm not able to have Chameleon Socks be a failsafe for me. I also agree with Dennis that some of the environment variables and things like that are not working that well anymore. There's a move supposedly in the open source community to make a proxy lib or something like that. I don't really know how far that's going. I just have heard that people are discussing that there's going to be a standard approach across the board for proxies. We need this so terribly badly, but I don't know how to make that forward.
Okay, and I feel great. It's not just me. It's a big problem. So after I mastered proxies, got stuff building, what happens when things go wrong? A quick start guide's great. You build an image, you can add a package to it. It's all looking good, and then suddenly something breaks. In my case, it was when I started working with OpenJDK, and things were breaking everywhere. Lots of errors. You're not quite sure what was going wrong. So this is stuff I kind of gleaned from speaking to my colleagues in the team, and it wasn't stuff I could easily get out of the documentation. It's all there, but if you're new, it's kind of harder to work out. I mean, starting from if you add a layer into bblayers.conf, get the path slightly wrong, it's not obvious, or it certainly wasn't obvious when I started. And when things broke, if only I had a clearer idea of the build pipeline, that would really have helped. And then when somebody showed me bit minus G, again, I was understanding more and more and understanding things in the dependency. And in the start, I could see there were things in TMP work, but I was just thinking those folder names, they're magic. I just really didn't understand what was going on. Again, people in my team educated me on that. I couldn't find anything in the documentation that would help me where to look. And then on the whole, when you're adding a package to an image, usually package name equals recipe name. But then you find there are complications, and I'll go into that later. And even to be clearly told from the get-go, these are not necessarily the same, that would certainly have helped. And then I started off just building images, things would kind of blow up. Took me a while to work out, you can actually just build a recipe by itself. And again, all these things sound really obvious, but when I started out, they did not seem obvious to me. And then also to find out what's actually packaged in a package and what's in rootfs, to know what to look at the image folder, the package is split in the rootfs. Again, I had to have colleagues show me this. And if something along these lines had been in the development manual in an easy to find way, I would have ramped a lot faster. And I'm going to work with Scott to see if we can do something about that. So recipes, again, a pain point for lots of people. Lots of guides for how to start, but then there's a bit of a gap. After I got OpenJDK working, the team were wanting to use OpenCV. And I had the classic recipe versus package issue. I looked in the recipe, and I just pasted in an excerpt from it. I didn't know much about Python at the time, let alone BitBake, so I saw this, and I thought, what is going on? Again, it took me a while to speak to people in my team. eventually guided me that what was actually happening here, maybe not in this code, is that it was creating dynamic packages. So in other words, you didn't even know what those packages would be. It looked at all the shared objects it was building, used those file names to dynamically generate a package name, package it up using those names. So for somebody new in the door, I had no idea what was going on. What I think might be useful, again in the development manual, is to look at a few good citizens. In other words, nice, cleanly written recipes in OE Core, and maybe just explain what's going on there. I think that would be a massive help. So again, back to recipes and packages. Easy to assume, there's the one-to-one mapping. There isn't. Ken was showing the OE package util. I stumbled across that recently. That was really, really cool. Funnily enough, I actually came across DevTool Search before I came across that, but it was really useful. The risk I'm going to try and break out of my presentation. I came across two shall we call it, recipes. One was called OpenCV, which is all about computer vision, and one is UPM, is about sensors. Both build from really big code bases and build lots of shared libraries, but they package them up completely differently. And at the time, I wasn't sure what the best pattern was to use. So if I look in here, so if I start with OpenCV, which is the one that has more. So if you look in the packages split, here is the dynamic packages I was talking about. So when I was new in the door, guy wants OpenCV, great. I can add OpenCV. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add OpenCV. So I do, the image install plus equals OpenCV. And as we go in here, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing new appeared in my image. I was new in the door. I thought, what on earth have I done wrong? I could not figure it out. If I'd known about the search stuff, I would have, I'd have known the dynamic packages that I ought to have had, say, lib opencv-video. So I ought to have done image install plus equals lib opencv-video on whichever other domains I required. But that took me a while to work out. At the same time, I was working with, but on the upside of this here is that when you build OpenCV and add it, it added nothing at all. But if it had added everything, I could have had hundreds of shared libraries in my image, but the guy only needed 2 or 3. So latterly, once you get your head around it, OpenCV guys had done the right thing. Other one I dealt with was called UPM. So if we look in packages split here, in UPM, we go into user lib. We here have got about 200 entries, if not more. So I added this, and suddenly, bam! I've got all this stuff, and I don't really need it. So because I was contributing to this, I made changes to the CMake so I could just build the packages I wanted to. But in fact, maybe the best solution here was to use the dynamic packages trick. But do people know what that is, the dynamic packages? So in other words, it's essentially Python code, goes through all of these things here, and it creates a package for each of the shared libraries. And again, I could not find any documentation. Let's see, I'm on Tim's one here. So I could not find any documentation readily about shared libraries. About dynamic packages, but it seems to be a sensible approach, and generally creating sub-packages for large projects seems to be the approved pattern. But again, it's people who know what they're doing do this. Guys that are new in the door, clueless like me, don't know you're meant to do this. So you end up with recipes like UPM that just jams a whole lot of crap in your rootfs. Okay. Any thoughts on this?
I'll add that two places where the dynamic sub-packages, well, they're not completely dynamic, but so Python and Perl have a lot of standard libraries and things that are included with them, right? But remember that we came from Yocto is supposed to be small, so we came from this world where everything was supposed to be small. We only have the minimum of what you wanted installed, and so all of that stuff was developed at the beginning to add only what you needed. And so we broke up Python standard libraries, which so anybody would expect to go and say apt-get install Python 3, and you got everything and it's going to run 100%. But that's not what it is in Yocto project and Open Embedded. It's the same with Perl. It's a sore point, but we've got people that want it to be easy, and we have people that need it to be ultra, ultra, ultra small. And so we had to err on the side of ultra small. So you need to figure this out somehow. And I definitely agree with Henry in this case that UPM would have been a big surprise to me to get 200 shared libraries all of a sudden.
Yep.
A few more good examples.
Yeah.
Kernel models. So when you build kernel, build all the models and it packages dynamically all of them into individual packages. So you can actually install them on individual basis of what you need.
Yeah.
Or you can actually pull kernel models method, I believe, that will actually pull everything.
Oh, right, okay, yes.
Same with DStreamer and all the plugins for DStreamer.
So you have a package that's dependent on all the sub-packages, so it's a meta package, yeah.
Empty meta package which automatically are dependent.
I wish OpenCV had done that. That might have been, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we really need is that meta package approach,
yes.
So that for a development situation, you can have everything there very, very easily, or if you're not in a space constrained situation, you can have it all there very, very easily. But if we were to break the space constrained model, we would have a lot of people get angry at us extremely rapidly.
Okay, that's great, guys. Thanks for the feedback. Okay, next one is application development. In fact, my first few comments are kind of petty in a way, but also now I'm no longer working on the Yocto project itself, but I'm working in the team that's actually using it. This has suddenly become more relevant. So when I first started working with this stuff, I was hearing about the ADT, the SDK, ESDK tool chain. People who knew what they were talking about were kind of almost using these terms interchangeably. And I really didn't know what was going on. It took me a while to tease all this apart and understand it. Since then, ADT is gone. But ironically, Application Development Toolkit makes the most sense to me. And not that it's going to change, because apparently before I joined, there was a big discussion that ADT wasn't being understood by people. I'm not sure why. And so they went for this term called SDK. Well, the team I'm working on now, we're developing an SDK for real-time optimizations. So now I have to tell people in my team, right, if you want to build your SDK, you use the Yocto SDK. And they look at me and they go, what? That makes no sense. And the overloaded term of SDK just confuses the hell out of everyone. I don't know if anyone's had the same feedback from teams they've worked with. But anyway, it really does not really, it doesn't help. And Eclipse, you were working on that for a while. So when I first worked on it, the documentation was broken. I didn't know what I was doing, and it didn't really work. Documentation is in a better state now. Maybe you can say something.
So I've been the Eclipse maintainer, Eclipse plugin for Yocto maintainer for 2 years now, and every single release cycle, a new person ends up being the one doing the quality check on it, and they do it all manually. And it turns into 3 days of helping them figure out how to do it right. So we are just failing miserably on this Eclipse plugin right now. So the problem is that it was written 7 years ago, it's bit rotting. So we've been turning stuff out, trying to keep it alive, but I've got a team now that's actually embarking on doing it in a much, much better way. And we're actually going to upstream everything so that you won't have to go through the pain of installing the Yocto project plugin. Hopefully, you'll just use standard upstream Eclipse CDT and things like that. It's a big pain point.
So I'm wondering, when we hear the video playback of this, are we going to hear the champagne opening? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You hold with the drink now. They
Right,
didn't know
yeah,
what
yes.
it was before, but now that you've told them.
Yeah. So, yeah, right. So after whining a bit, I wanted to acknowledge improvements. We've heard people talking about ESDK and DevTool. One of the things I like about ESDK as well is that if you're going to people working on just application development, it's kind of a pre-canned Yocto build environment. You can actually build the image and do a lot of stuff with it. And DevTool's been a great interface as well. My main complaint I meant to raise earlier is DevTool build is smart enough to build all the dependencies for your application, but DevTool deploy target is not smart enough to deploy them. So in other words, if you do a DevTool add for, say, a Node.js app, you think you're golden, you deploy it and run it, hasn't deployed runtime.
So we have this problem with that because DevTool knows nothing about what's on the target, right? And so when you do DevTool deploy target, it can't go in there and say, you know, app list or whatever. It doesn't know what the heck's there. And so we're thinking about it, and we're not sure actually your next line under raw support. We're not sure if it's worth the effort to make DevTool deploy target that much smarter, but it is a sore point. It's something you got to remember.
Yeah. So yeah, the recipe tool stuff is great. More stuff appearing there. I was working with a team who were doing lots of ROS stuff, and we added recipe tool support for ROS. That was a big success. But is it worth investing more in recipe tool, or is the feeling that if it gets you 80% of the way there, is that worth it, or do you still have to throw the problem to the bubba that Tim was talking about?
So I've been working on this problem for a long time with recipe tool, DevTool, and so on because I do a lot of Perl stuff and it's not maintained or not in recipe tool. The guy came up with an option of doing using CPAN, using Perl native dependency checking and things like that to generate recipes. And so that's where meta CPAN came from. And when we started seeing that, I started realizing maybe it was better to use the native tooling for the dependencies and everything, and then just have it talking to BitBake somehow so we could generate the recipes. So we're still hatching what that's actually going to be. Either way is a ton of work, but recipe tool itself, I think, is, my gut feels it's more brittle and more work to make recipe tool do it than it's going to be to do the language native stuff, especially with dependencies. But. Okay.
Package feeds. I wrote this before I knew there would be talk about package feeds. And actually, Stefano's presentation reminded me of how to fix one of the issues here. So that's a great success from Dev Day. I thought I was aware that there were plans to try and get rid of the having to build a package index. I remember when I started working with package feeds, it took me ages to work out why they sometimes weren't synchronized, and it's because I wasn't running BitBake package index. And I thought that was going to be added when you just did an image. It was going to do this. Is that happening, or?
No, it's a big gotcha. It's definitely, so running package index is something that I think we leave up to the user.
Yes.
So whether or not you want to index those packages, whether or not that's something you're using.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to see if we could set a flag for those people who are using package feeds regularly.
Yeah.
It would be nice if there was a flag that said always run the package.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, because I mean, that's another bit of tribal knowledge that's kind of ending up in tips and tricks. And yeah.
So maybe we could just do a distro variable or something like that, local.conf variable that would just be, if it's set to 1, it just does it. Because I think the reality is package index task does not take a long time. So I almost wonder if we either need to make it in there by default, or we need to enable it so it just always runs.
So what does dependency mean?
What was that?
What does BitBake package index run dependencies?
So what does BitBake package index do? It actually.
Well, I know what it does.
Yeah,
but basically.
All it does is it generates for RPM, right? It generates the
The package is fine.
the packages file and the correct directory structure, like for, you know, if you've got a Debian package feed or whatever it is, it generates the repo that you would use.
Right. The question was specifically not what it does, but how it does it behind the scenes. Because the reason is I'm not using this package index, but I'm using package index script from YPDD-2018.
Oh, right. Yes, yes. Because
I have no idea what it does.
yeah, I don't know, but it's certainly when I didn't run this, I was getting checksum errors because it was pushing up a new package and there was then a mismatch in the checksum in the package and the repo index. I'm not a repo guy, so. But this fixed it.
It does call? Okay. If it does call, yeah. I was just wanted to check.
Right, yep, yep. So also I talked about the development task manual. Hopefully that will be improved. I am not spending as much time with Scott as I should do. And also with crops. Is anybody here actually using crops? Any of the containers that let you do builds for ESDK? Anything else? Yeah.
I expect to be as another.
Yeah. Yeah, I think resourcing for this kind of dried up slightly on the Intel side, so I'm not quite sure how that stands. Okay. Cool things I thought when I stumbled across package config, I thought that was cool. And scan slip when things went wrong, and overrides I thought were really useful. Also, layer dependencies, the amount of projects where I'd add in layers and there was one missing, the build would continue, blow up halfway through, because this would fix it. Conditional object with Python in the recipe, that was great. And I was going to ask what's your favorite, but I think I've lost the crowd.
That's a guy for the beginning class.
Yeah. All right, and that's it.
So I completely walked away at the time we asked if anybody's using crops. So is anybody using crops in the Docker containers?
Not really, not really.
Is it because you don't know about it, or is it because it's not something you're interested in?
We got one saying it didn't work correctly.
Okay, so anyway, we'll take that under advisement.
Right, okay.
Okay.
I think I'm done.
Well, thank you. Thank you.